I got involved in the restaurant industry. I bartended for years and throughout college. Um, and that kind of fit with my schedule back then. That led to me getting a restaurant of my own. And that kind of led to me getting more involved politically because restaurants were really got the
Hmm.
blunt of a lot of these restrictions and everything, particularly earlier in the pandemic, wherein restaurants really across the entire state were shut down.
Yeah. Yeah, they really got it bad, and restaurants already run on a tiny profit margin for the most part, so they can't afford to just close their doors for months on end. That's for sure. It's funny because my father's he runs restaurants, or he used to. He sold out of the business now, and he was super into martial arts, and he just has this just this dedication about things. When he's bullheaded about things, I guess you'd say. But it's definitely a nice thing to have, and a lot of people aren't trained in that anymore. That's for sure. Um, so we'll get into what you've done personally in a moment, but I want to talk about the national headlines and stuff. We were talking about earlier. The Senate has voted to abolish Biden's vaccine mandate, and what do you think about that?
I think that it's a great move. It seems to be more of a symbolic move at this point because, as we've seen currently, all three of the federal mandates are halted for the time being,
Mm-hmm.
either by an injunction or a temporary restraining order. So this only, I think, solidifies that. And I think it's good because part of the battle is really public sentiment as well. So it's good to see a bipartisan vote and having two Democrats come over and state that they're not necessarily opposed to mandates, but they do have or they're not necessarily opposed to vaccines, sorry, but they have an issue with the federal government mandating it, which I see as a pretty blatant 10th Amendment violation.
Yeah, and I was telling you I wanted to get into this topic because I don't hear a lot of people saying this. Democrats used to be the most adamant about anti-vaxxers. 10 years ago, I was super liberal, and I remember the people I was hanging out with, they were so against vaccines, especially forcing vaccines. I mean, they were the most adamant. Up in New York, I mean, they were fighting against those mandates hard. And anytime something would change where a school might enforce something, or that one time this court opinion went around and people were misinterpreting it. They thought that the court opinion said that religious exemptions were no longer allowed in New York, which I think is now the case, but back then it wasn't. But basically, the judge told the woman that she had too many things going and she should have just stuck to proving her religious exemption. But my point being that this was like a very left-leaning community, and they were all super into this. So, but then everything flipped. I mean, how do you have any idea about how that would have happened? I mean, it's just a mystery to me.
Yeah, I mean the party of my body, my choice, right? Except
Yeah.
I guess when it comes to vaccines, it would seem. I think part of it is just that the pandemic's been so politicized, and anytime you have an issue that you can leverage to try to seek or maintain power, people in positions of power are going to utilize it. And COVID, unfortunately, just really turned into that. Masks took on almost a symbolic meaning. We saw just information that changed so quickly, but people were so quick to just jump on the train that their side was driving. And even you saw posts after the vaccine was available. I would see people post on social media saying, I'm fully vaccinated, but I'm going to still wear my mask because I don't want to be confused as a Trump supporter or things like that. So it's really silly and unfortunate that politics has played such a large role in an issue that really should be about public health and what's best for the public as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I couldn't. Well, see, I don't want to get into the health things or anything that might be construed as health information, but I have to say this: that it was 2019. I trained to be an EMR, emergency medical responder, and one of the things they taught us is if you have a tuberculosis patient, and that's a bacteria, that's 1,000 times bigger than a virus. They said the little medical masks that everybody's wearing, it won't do anything to stop you from getting it. You have to wear like an N95, like the construction mask. And now all of a sudden, all that science has changed. It used to be well established. I don't know what happened. Obviously, a lot of politicization. But I guess going back to the vaccine mandates being stopped at the Senate, yeah, I guess they face now an uphill battle in the House. Do you think that'll pass there? Is there any chance of that?
Probably not. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has too much control there. I just don't see it happening really. And I like how you mentioned kind of the changing narrative behind masks. And, what I thought of is the 60 Minutes interview with Dr. Fauci. I believe it was March of 2020, where, they said, they were very clear. The person that was interviewing him said, people at home are listening. Like, what is it? What's the deal with these masks? And he said that, masks may block a particle or two, but it's not going to offer you protection. He said, like you see pictures in other countries where everyone's wearing a mask. That's not going to help us here. And it seemed as the political winds kind of changed, all of a sudden his tune changed as well. And, I think that over the last year and a half, it's really highlighted just how politicized the medical industry is as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really goes back a long ways, in my opinion, about how the medical industry got such a hold. I think starting with like Obamacare, that was what turned me from the left. Was when they said you have to buy health insurance. I was like homeless. I was like, you're going to tell me I have to buy health insurance, or I'm going to get a fine? You're crazy. So
yeah, if you can't afford health insurance, they're going to fine you.
Like ridiculous. Yeah, and the funny thing about those mandates is, they're already blocked by several different courts. Can you give us an overview of what's going on there? Because to me, I get confused about which mandate is being blocked sometimes. I feel like all of them relate to Executive Order 14042, which mandated for federal contractors that they get vaccinated. And then that went through the courts, and it was going to hit the public via OSHA, which was blocked in the, 5th Circuit Court? Or 6th Circuit Court? And now it's under review, that one. But then we had another block hitting the order itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe the federal contractors one, that originally, if I'm not mistaken, was just limited to 3 states, but I believe it's just this week that was expanded to include the entire country now. The OSHA one was the first one that was blocked. I believe it was a federal judge out of Texas, I want to say, and that was for any private employer with 100 employees or more, and that was reaffirmed, I believe, after appeal. And then here in Missouri, our Attorney General led a coalition of 10 states that were challenging the healthcare provider mandate, and that within just the last couple of weeks, they were able to secure an injunction blocking that as well. So as of just this week, with the recent expansion of the federal contractor mandate, now all 3 federal mandates are blocked countrywide.
That's crazy. I mean, it came late, but it came through, a lot of it this week. But so what we got you on here today to talk about is you were part of a movement in Missouri to basically get the courts to block, I guess, all COVID restrictions that aren't legal, at least. Can you explain what that was? So what did the court decide?
Yeah, I guess to kind of give you a little background, it's all started last November when the county executive in St. Louis County announced that they were going to shut down all restaurant dining rooms. This despite the fact that all surrounding counties and cities were keeping their restaurants open. And in the weeks leading up to the announcement, they came out and said that the main driver of new spread was actually small gatherings in homes, not businesses. They said that they were doing this for hospitalizations, but they had stated that over 50% of hospitalizations were coming from surrounding counties and cities. And the director of the St. Louis area pandemic task force himself, just a couple of weeks prior, in a radio interview, said that shutting down restaurants would not do anything at this point because it was already too widespread in the community. Mm-hmm. So then you have this county executive who just won a campaign based on COVID response, who's an anesthesiologist. He came out and said that he was shutting down restaurants. And it was clear to me that this was just an example of a politician that felt pressure to act, to do something, and restaurants kind of made a convenient scapegoat at the time. So, I decided it was time to fight back. I had seen what was going around the country, and I was sick of it. I knew it was going to continue as long as we, the people, allow it to. And so right away, I got on the phone, built a coalition of other restaurant owners, talked to some allies at the Missouri Restaurant Association that I'd partnered on some other activism projects with earlier in the pandemic. And we filed a lawsuit against St. Louis County with approximately 40 restaurants in conjunction with the Restaurant Association. We were denied a temporary restraining order to block the order, though my restaurant remained open. I did interviews from inside my dining room stating as much, kind of put a little bit of a target on my back saying, we're not closing down. These are the reasons why, and these are the reasons why you shouldn't close down either. That caught the attention of some lawmakers, and December 1st of 2020, State Senator Koenig out here asked to do a press conference in front of my restaurant. It was the first day of early bill filing, and he announced he'd be filing a bill that would rein in some of these health officials and restore oversight and accountability in the way that they could issue these. I guess the county executive wasn't a fan of the speech I gave at that press conference, because within hours, the health department was at my door saying they were declaring us a hazard to public health and suspending our license.
And this was all in 2020.
Yeah, so this is December 2020, and I had the attorney that was representing the restaurants in that suit reach out to the health department about a hearing, saying, "Hey, this is clearly an unlawful suspension because the term they use, hazard to public health, is specifically a restaurant transmitting disease through food, which had nothing to do with the issue they had with us." They said that they would amend the charge mid-hearing until they found something to get us with. So that phrase was burned into my head and really drove me to take a lot of the actions I did going forward. I traveled to the Capitol, testified all these hearings to try to get that legislation passed. We ended up getting something by the end of the legislative session, but didn't go far enough. And when we were denied the TRO, the attorneys, we tried a different strategy and tried filing suit against the Department of Health and Senior Services directly, which is the Cole County case that just recently made headlines.
So the first one you targeted, who again? The Department of Health?
Yeah, Department of Health in St. Louis County. We were seeking a temporary restraining order just to allow the restaurants to stay open and, for our employees to be able to continue working and maintain some kind of income through the holidays. But we weren't successful there. But we decided, we had to do something, and we wanted to just attack this problem at its root. And sure enough, a better part of a year later, it ended up paying off, and now all mandates in the state of Missouri have been declared null and void.
And so the second suit you filed against the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. So you went to the state institution rather than St. Louis Health Department?
Yeah, so anytime the county, in St. Louis County, the director of health is one man with no public comment, oversight, and accountability, had issued over 400 pages of these mandates, essentially law, by one person. It was a clear violation of the separate branches of government and the system of checks and balances that our country is founded on. Mm-hmm. So we sought a declaratory judgment saying, hey, can you give the state, we want to kind of force the state to give their interpretation, because we don't believe that the statute means that they have this power. It said that they could, in some cases, quarantine an individual or close an establishment, but they were interpreting that to say that they had the authority to close an entire industry when there was no proof that any transmission was occurring there. So that's what we were seeking to do. And the judge kind of went further and was very vocal about his opposition to what was occurring in his order. And I know you had the opportunity to read it. There were some lines in there that were just pure gold. And said that they'd transform our system into something that even a sixth grade civics student wouldn't recognize.
So the judge wrote the judgment, because I know sometimes they'll let one of the plaintiffs or the defendant write the judgment, but the judge wrote this one.
I'm sure that our attorney worked with him on some of the content in there. I'm not really sure as far as who did what fully. It was a bit of an 18-page order, so I'm sure there was probably a collaboration between a few people. Yeah,
that's true. Well, I'm looking at it right now, and I mean the first paragraph is pretty amazing. This case is about, and I mean, the way it's almost, they state it so simply, you're like, obviously that's true. This case is about whether Missouri's Department of Health and Senior Services regulation can abolish representative government in the creation of public health laws, and whether it can authorize closure of schools or assembly based on the unfettered opinion of an unelected individual. The court finds it cannot. I mean, obviously, right? It's so simple and it's self-evident.
You would think so, but yet it's been so difficult to get any judge for so long to rule this way. I think that the problem was that a lot of people were concerned more about public opinion and backlash than what the law actually states and following the rule of law. And fortunately, this, to an extent, it did restore my faith in the system, that there's still people out there to which this matters.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the biggest thing is, I think one of the biggest mistakes we made, and maybe that's why it's taking so long to get something done, is focusing on the federal government, looking to the president to solve things, looking to just the federal government at large to solve things when we have the state and county and local governments and working with them and through the courts. We have a lot more options that people don't even consider. And I think because we're so blindsided by the federal government and thinking that's where the solution is, we don't see the more obvious, simpler thing that's right in front of us. And obviously it still takes work, but here's the proof that that worked. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many good lines in here. Like, it is incumbent on the courts to ensure decisions are made according to the rule of law, not hysteria. One hopes that this great principle, essential to any freedom or any free society, including ours, will not itself become yet another casualty of COVID-19. I mean, I don't know. This is such apparent stuff, but so what do you think?
It's refreshing after everything that we've seen over the last year and a half. It really is. You know, it makes you smile to hear that. Like, wow, like you're not crazy. Like this country, you know, is based on the principles that we thought it was. Just, I guess, to so many people, I think, have just grown accustomed to taking that freedom for granted, and that's really became evident over the last 18 months.
And well, I think that people used to be more informed about the courts in general. I mean, I think the average citizen in the 1800s probably knew how to handle a court. They could probably do a lot of things in court on their own that we don't even know anymore. It used to be common knowledge among, at least when it was like when America was younger, but we've really forgotten how to use that, even though it's really simple. And I mean, like, there's Jesus in the Bible, Yeshua, says, "Woe unto you lawyers, for you've hidden the keys of knowledge." And that was 2,000 years ago. So the attorneys have been working for a long time to hide the court system from the public and use it against them, but the solutions are there. And people,
absolutely,
and that's why I like stories like this, because it's like a ray of sunshine in a crazy time right now. It is. So how did you figure out, you said the first time you failed, why do you think your first restraining order was denied? Where did you fall short?
That's a good question. It was really disappointing to see that. It didn't seem like the judge in that case was really prepared to go out on a limb, especially, we know a little more now. Public sentiment has changed a little bit as opposed to where it was a year ago. And particularly in St. Louis County, which leans more to the left than the rest of the state. It's kind of a blue dot in the Red Sea, they say. And I think that fear of public backlash played a part. And also, at the time, I was encouraged to get out there and be very public about the suit and about my opposition at the restaurant. And, I went from before the pandemic, maybe doing 5 interviews my entire life, to at one point when I was probably doing 5 a day. And so I was I guess there was some concern that might have actually ended up backfiring in the end and maybe put more pressure on the judge and made it more difficult, which is why when we filed this new suit, my restaurant was quietly taken off the previous one and put on this one. But this one I wasn't allowed to talk about at all, which was really difficult, going from, being kind of the face of the last lawsuit to keeping this a secret until just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because I'm always, because I've been covering the Maxwell trial and how trials are publicized, and it's interesting the effect that it has, because sometimes it can be helpful to publicize it and sometimes it can be harmful. And I think the lawyer's opinion is always no publicization at all if you can avoid it. So I was talking to some lawyers about why the Maxwell trial is not being live streamed or anything, and they're very adamant that it shouldn't be. But whereas the public said, I think 80% of them wanted everything to be live streamed. But from what you're saying, not going public actually allowed you to make an impact on the entire state.
Yeah, it definitely seemed to be the correct move. And just everything, this was all new. Nobody had really been in this situation before. So, it took a little bit of a trial and error and trying different approaches. And, unfortunately, some of it's kind of luck of the draw too, because a big part of it is just what judge you get, what their personal beliefs about our system are, and their own philosophies on the law in our country.
Did you change any of the arguments you made from the first one to the second one? Did you recall?
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been so long since I read the original brief, but the second one was much more constitutionally focused. based on how it violated the division of powers and things of that nature. Whereas the first one, we had a collaboration of attorneys working on it first. There were so many people involved. I think that it was almost too broad instead of more. I think that maybe it would have helped if it was a little more narrowly focused, which I think that was something that helped, that, we were direct in the argument that we were making, and I'm sure that helped.
Did you use the Missouri Constitution in the first one, or did you stick to the U.S. Constitution only?
Yeah, I believe it was referenced, though. It was just a part of a number of arguments that were being made in that one.
And I've seen that in the past. I just mentioned it earlier about the New York case where the woman made 7 different arguments about why her child shouldn't be forced to be vaccinated. And among them was a religious request. But the judge basically said, you made so many points here that I don't believe that your religious exemption is sincere. So if she just focused on the religious exemption, he basically told her he would have granted it, was what I read. So
Yeah, I think that's a mistake a lot of people have made in these kind of cases. They almost overcomplicate it when in reality it's like you said when you're referring to the Cole County judgment, it's really simple. He references, I think it was a 6th grade student, just kind of indicating just how obvious just the misuse of the system has been.
Yeah, let me see. So at what point did you decide to start running for the Senate? Was it during this fight?
Yeah, it was. It came. I think part of it came at because of the speech I gave at that press conference when they announced that bill, and I remember getting a text from one of our current state senators, I think a few days after, saying, "Hey, we enjoyed your speech. Somebody told me that you should consider running for state senate," and I ended up meeting with him and another former senator a week or two later, and they phrased it in a more serious manner, like, is this something that you would consider? And Grant, beginning of the pandemic, I'd grown my business for I think 7 years consecutively. We were started off 20% over the best year we ever had. So the conversations we were having back then were about opening a second location, continuing to build the business. And at the time, I saw that as the best way to provide for my children's future, to provide for them financially. But after everything everyone witnessed throughout the pandemic and what was going on across the country and really across the world, my concern and priority started to shift. And I became more concerned about what kind of world do I want them to grow up in. And that seemed more like the immediate concern than just, building things financially to just provide for them in that manner. And so I took some time, and I think that was probably mid-December 2020 when I was first approached about it. And I think by the end of January, I talked it over with family, prayed on it, and talked with my business partner, and decided that this is something that I have to pursue.
Yeah, that's awesome that you did that. Because for me, I've been wanting to. Nobody's impacted my life directly. I'm not a restaurant owner. If I had been, maybe I would have been in your shoes. But I write online, so I don't wear a mask when I go to the store. I never did, and I would, if a store was too adamant about it, if people freaked out, I just wouldn't go there anymore. Write a complaint on Google. I'm surprised they didn't boot my account for saying, because the only complaints I was making is, oh, they wouldn't serve me without a mask, even though I had a religious exemption. And Google left them up, surprisingly. So I don't know. I don't know. But that's the biggest thing is, like, a lot of people were like, oh, I'll just go along with it for now, and they got trapped. I think a lot of people are still trapped in that mentality.
People, there's a lot of intimidation and shame used to try to keep people silent, particularly if you're a business owner. I can't tell you how many 1-star reviews I've gotten at my restaurant, Satchmo's Bar and Grill, since, throughout the last year and a half, but even just since the order came out. I think in the first week I had like 8 1-star reviews with no text, just conveniently came out there. So you're going to get bashed. We live in this cancel culture to where you say something people don't like, they're going to try to cancel you and put you out of business. So I kind of understand why some people are hesitant to get involved. And for years, I did everything I could to keep politics out of my business, because you don't want to alienate any of your potential customers. But at some point, if you don't get involved in the political process, politics is going to come to your door. And that's exactly what happened in this case.
Yeah, to an extreme, I'd say. Did you find, so you got a lot of public backlash online, I'd imagine most of it. Did you get any public support?
Yeah, that was something that I was really surprised about initially because I think back to when they announced the restaurant shut down last November, and I had done a couple interviews saying that I was going to defy the order. Started this social media group, St. Louis Restaurants United. They got a big following, got some attention, and I did a couple interviews saying I would defy it. And then came the first day the order took effect, and I got a text from one of the reporters saying, "Hey, did you guys stay open?" I said, "Of course." She asked if I would then meet her in my dining room to interview again, saying that we're openly defying the order. And I'm just thinking, oh boy, like, it's one thing to talk about doing it, but to actually,
Yeah.
once the order's in effect, saying, I'm not obeying it, here I am. And I looked over at my 4-year-old sitting on the couch. I was at my kitchen table on my computer working. He's just watching TV. And I started thinking, like, this is a pretty historic time that we're living in. At one point, when my children asked me what my role was, what am I going to be able to say? Am I going to have to say that, like most people, I just went along with what everyone else was doing because that's what we were told to do? Or am I going to be able to tell them that I actually made a stand and actually fought for something that I believed was right and made the hard decision right then and there? I kind of flipped the switch in my head and I never looked back since.
That's amazing. Did anybody asking you how you did it yet? Like, is there other restaurant owners in other states contacting you at all, or?
Yeah, I've gotten contact from people from other parts of Missouri. I've had people from like Florida, other states that have called the restaurant before, and everything from like parents that are dealing with school issues to other restaurants dealing with similar situations. And I always try to do what I can to give people some pointers, share my personal experiences and hope that there's something from it that they can take and apply. I think that this Cole County case did set a precedent that hopefully other states can use to start to free themselves. And it helps that we have an attorney general in this state that's very liberty minded, that's kind of been leading the charge fighting some of these vaccine mandates. So I know that worked to our benefit. And it's not enough just to get an order, a judgment like this. You need to have follow-up to ensure that it's followed also. So he's been very proactive, staying on the local health departments and school districts and saying, hey, you need to comply with this order, otherwise he's going to take action against them. So that's been huge. And finally, we're starting to see some of the school districts slowly, one by one, kind of like dominoes, start to change their policies to align with the order.
And that was one of the things that stood out to me too. This court orders the director of the Department of Health and Senior Services to provide a copy of this order to all local health authorities throughout Missouri. I mean, that's substantial. So like now the order is going to be passed down and say, hey, you guys got to stick to this, from the health department itself to all the local health authorities. I mean, that's a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're talking about standing out publicly as a business, and I know I see one business doing this in New York City. He got vaccinated, and he's public about getting vaccinated. But when the mandates came out in New York City, they got the passport. He said, I'm not going to be, he publicly came out, and he said, I'm not enforcing this. I'm not enforcing it on my employees. I'll talk to my employees and encourage them to get it because he believes in it. But he also acknowledged, Louis Rosman, he said this. One of his employees had a heart attack immediately after. So this is somebody who is encouraging the vaccine, but acknowledges that his employee had a heart attack from it. I mean, I don't know. That's beyond me. But New York City, I mean, it's good that people like you are pushing back, because otherwise, have you seen what's happening in New York City?
It's so terrible. And the Surgeon General just put out this statement about how there's this mental health crisis with children in our society. And I think it was a statistic like there's been a 51% increase in adolescent females and thoughts or attempts of suicide. And at what point do people have to start waking up and realize there's consequences of these policies that go beyond just immediate physical public health? This is going to take an emotional toll on children for decades to come. It affects their development. If these policies, public health is an important part of policies regarding the pandemic, but it's only one component. These decisions should be making by consulting with a panel of public health officials, with psychologists, sociologists, economists, and a lot of that's been just completely left out of the debate.
Yeah, I mean, children are growing up not seeing each other's faces now. It's wild. I can't even imagine what that'll do to them as they grow old. Depression, among other things, I'd imagine. Well, I'd like to say you're definitely a good candidate. Not not only are you politically active, but you make yourself available to the public. And I interviewed my senator. I had a podcast. He was one of my first guests, the senator here in North Carolina, and he's always been available. Over 15 years, he was in the House of Representatives, and I called him years ago when I was like super liberal about some fracking issue, and I yelled at him, and he called me back. I was surprised, and then years later he moved up the chain, and he's still available to the public. And he said that was one of his biggest things, was just making himself available to the public, hearing their concerns, and being there. And I think that's a huge part of being a representative of the people.
Absolutely. If anyone watching wants to learn more about me, they can go to benbrownforsenate.com. I don't know what your following in Missouri looks like, but if anyone wants to volunteer or donate or anything like that, you can do that online as well. And I'm just continuing to get out there and get in front of as many people as possible. I'm actually at the Real Talk 93.3 radio station, as you can see from the graphic behind me, and they have a town hall event later tonight. So myself and some current state senators and representatives are holding an event to speak and address questions from people, and I think that's so important, more now really than ever.
And you're running in the what district is that in Missouri?
It's State Senate District 26, so it currently includes all of Franklin County, which is just outside of St. Louis, and parts of St. Louis County as well. Cities of Eureka, Wildwood, some in Chesterfield. We have redistricting coming up, so that's subject to change to a certain extent, but that's where the boundaries are currently.
That's awesome. Do you have someone running against you, or?
Yeah, I believe I have two primary opponents right now. One's a second generation politician. His father was a former state senator, and I'm really tired of people that are getting involved in politics just to advance a career.
Yeah.
And in there for their own interests.
Yeah,
we have a
sure.
super majority of Republicans in the House and Senate in Missouri, yet we can't get common sense, but it should be common sense reforms passed on education or anything, because people just see the political party as a vehicle to power. I'm sick of that, and that's why I'm running. I'm obviously more the outsider candidate, but I want to put an end to that and start actually trying to make a difference.
That's awesome. Let me see. I thought there was something else, but can't think of it right now. Is there anything else you want to close out with?
Oh, I know that's all I can think of off the top of my head. I guess you can follow me on Twitter, Ben Brown Tweets, Ben Brown Missouri on Facebook, or like I said, benbrownforsenate.com. And feel free to reach out to me, whether through social media or anything else. If anyone's facing a similar situation in your state, I'm happy to share my experiences, and hopefully I can offer something that might be able to help.
And when's the election? What?
It's first Tuesday in August for the primary, and then the general would be November 2022. And my district's pretty conservative area, so the primary is the big obstacle.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. Thanks for coming on. I'm gonna end the stream, and we can chat for a second. And